Have you been on the Awwward website recently and seen some of the awesome interaction and animation and thought, geez, I wish I could put that into my project? You'd be surprised that you can actually pull off a lot of interactions and animations natively in Figma. So in this video, I'm going to go through 4 different animation techniques and walk you through how you can actually do them in Figma. After going through the Awwward websites and looking at all the different interactions and animations, I've picked out 4 different ones that we're going to build in Figma. The different animations we're going to build is a loading animation, which is a fairly common one when the website's loading and you kind of get a preload before the website actually loads. After that, we're going to go through what I'm calling a mask reveal animation, when the website actually loads and it gets revealed in a unique way. After that, we're going to go through a basic typography effect. A lot of these websites have really strong typography and then they use animation and these interactions to just lift it a little bit higher. And then the last animation we're going to go through is a scroll animation. These are really fun to just add a bit of delight as the users going through your website or just make a really memorable moment. Okay, so we're in Figma now. We're going to break up our animation into 4 sections. So the loading animation, the mask reveal, the typography animation, and the scroll animation. And the process that we're going to follow is that in this top area, I have the storyboard of what I want the animation to be. So for example, this loading animation, I want the count up to start at 0, and then count up as it goes, and then reach 100, and then it will go into the next animation. And I have this with all of them, the basic storyboard of what I want the animation to look like. And then below, we're going to build them out together in real time of how I'm actually going to create all these different animations. So let's start with the loading animation. So with the loading animation, it's all just around this component here. It's all just around making these characters into a component. There's nothing else on this page that we really need to do. So what we need to actually do is break it up from just one number into separate characters, and that will be how the component is made. So let's drag this frame down, and this can be our working zone as we build it out together. So we can kind of get rid of this section as we don't need anything to do with that. And it's all just to do with how we're going to get these characters to load. So at the moment, this is all just one type box, but we actually need to break them out and build them individually. So we're just going to do them one at a time, and then we'll repeat the process. So let's just start with a 0 to start off with. Click F on your keyboard to draw a frame. So you want the frame to match the size of whatever your type is. So in our layout panel, we have 79 by 140. So let's make it 79 by 140. Select the type and center it. And make sure it already is selected, but make sure clip content is selected on your frame. So that makes it when you drag something out of the frame, if you click Command Y, you can see that it's still there, but you can't see it anymore because it'll be outside the frame. Now what we need to do is add our numbers from 0 to 9. So copy your character, Command C, Command V, paste it, and then drag it below. As I was saying before, drag it out of your frame so it's down there. But the important thing is that it's still actually within your frame. So if I drag my frame around, you can see that it's still in because it's getting pulled around the same way that I'm dragging it. So now let's make this 1. And now keep going until you have numbers 1 to 9. I find sometimes if you move it just with your keyboard instead, so hold Shift and press your down and up keys. So that's easier to make sure that it's still within your frame. So now we have our characters 0 to 9. And you can see that they're all the family of this frame still, because as I move the frame around, you can still see that they're all moving and they're respecting that. One thing, if your numbers aren't lining up properly, maybe just check if you have them center aligned instead of left or right aligned. Now that we've made the first one, let's click Create Component up the top. Let's add a variant. Add a variant here. Let's pull it to the side so we can see it. And now select all of the letters that are in the second one. So they're all selected, and drag it up so that the 9 is on the screen. You can hold Shift and press the up key as well to get them aligned. And that's the basis of our first component setup. So now let's animate it. Click Prototype, drag a prototype noodle from the first 0 to the 9, let's set it as after delay. We'll start it straight away. After 1 millisecond, smart animate. Let's make it go for 500 milliseconds and let's set it to linear. And now, as this is going to be our furthest number, this one, we need it to go back to the 0 again, because as it keeps going up, when it goes to 59, for example, and then this goes to 60, we need this to go back to 0. So we'll drag a noodle back to the first one, and we'll set it as after delay. We'll change it straight away, and we'll set this one to instant. So now if we preview this one to see what happens, that is counting up to 9 and going back to 0. Now that we've set up the structure already, it's easy to make the next number as well. So this can be count up number 1, and then let's drag a copy to make count up number 2. So I'm really bad at maths. I actually got this calculation wrong the first time, so this is me redoing it. So to work out the after delay of the second number, we need to actually do a little bit of basic maths, which I got wrong. So the first digit, it takes 500 milliseconds to get from 0 to 9. So if we look at it, as this number is counting up 1, 2, 3, and then when it gets to 9, and then the next one changes to 70, that takes 500 milliseconds. So if we think about this counting from 0 to 100, we want this second number to feel natural, that it's changing at the right time. So the way we're going to do that calculation is 500 times 10, which gives us 5,000 milliseconds. So the second number component we're make it after delay duration of 5,000 milliseconds. And we want to remove the prototype noodle that's going back from the 9 to the 0. So remove that one. And now let's finish it off with making our third number. So copy this one again. Let's just make this count up number 3. But for this one, we actually only need it to go from 0 to 1, as this will be the 1 for the 100. So drag this down just to the number 1. And we're actually going to remove the prototype noodle for this one. We're going to use the animation settings as it changes from a frame. So now let's just reorder these, so it makes sense. So this is our 100, this is our second digit, and this is our first digit. So now grab all of these ones, all your zeros, and drag a copy of them. And now bring them up to the frame that we had before. And we've just set up the zeros here, just as a reference where we should be putting them so they're in the right area. So line them up and make sure that they are at the front. And now we actually don't need this second frame. This was just for the storyboard. And then for the second frame, we want to drag a copy of this one to the second one. So we can get rid of this one we had as a storyboard before. We don't need that. And we're going to set our first component to go from our first state to its second one. So it goes to 100. It's a good reminder, make sure your guides are removed. And now to finish the loop, because we don't actually have it finished at the moment, these will just keep running. So we need to drag a noodle from this one to the next frame. And we'll make this the same number as we made before. So after delay of 5,000 milliseconds to change from the first frame to the second frame. And make sure animation is set to instant. And we're going to actually detach these second two components so that they don't keep running, as when we want them to run on this frame, and then once they get to the next one, they stop running. So now if we click your first frame and click present to see what it looks like. And now we can see how the count up works. It's counting from 0 to 100. And then when it gets to 99, it flicks to the second one and it loads into the 100. And that's how we're going to build up our first animation, the count up one. The second animation we're going to be working on is the mask reveal animation. This is when the website's finished loading. So the storyboard we've set up is, it starts in a little square in the top left-hand corner, it expands horizontally the width of the screen, and then it finishes the reveal by expanding downwards. So it's almost like you're looking through a little window, and then the window is expanding as you're looking through it. So let's set up our work zone down below. So we're going to take the final state as the starting state, and we're going to work backwards a little bit. So we know what we're going to achieve, and then we'll work back from there. So with our image set up, we want to click R on the keyboard and draw a rectangle of what we want our initial state to look like. Let's rename that layer to keep it clean. And now with our new rectangle selected, right click, press send to back. Now with our rectangle still selected at the back, select our image as well. In the top right, click the dots and press use as mask. Now our image is getting masked by our rectangle that we set up. As you can see, they're both still here. There's our image and it's getting masked by the rectangle. So now drag a copy of the whole artboard. You want to make sure that you select the rectangle. And now as you drag, it will reveal more of the image, but it's not going to change the cropping of the image at all. It's just revealing more. So we've set up our second state now, which is when the image reveals the width of the screen. And now drag another copy of your artboard across to set up our final state of this animation. And same as before, make sure you have the rectangle selected on this and drag it up to the top of the screen and then drag it down to where your image ends. You can click Command Y on the keyboard to see the outlines so that you can drag your rectangle perfectly in line with your image so it's revealing the whole thing. Now we've set up all the 3 states that we need. Now go up to the top right, click Prototype, drag a noodle from the first frame to the second frame and set it to after delay, as we want this to be a continuous animation that once we start it the first time, it's going to roll through all the different 4 animations. We'll set it to start instantly, so after 1 millisecond it'll start, and then change it to Smart Animate. We're going to set it to 1200 milliseconds, and we're going to set up a custom curve. This is something important I find about making these larger animations in Figma, is that a lot of the finessing you can get out of from making it just look like another template animation to something a bit more personalized and customized is with setting up this custom curve. You can set that to whatever you want it to be. Have a play around and see if it looks and feels right with what you're going for. When that's done, drag a noodle from your second to your third one now, and it should just automatically pull in the same settings that you've just set up. But if not, I would just make it the same settings as before, but just change it to after delay and at 1 millisecond, so it starts straight away after the last one, and then just leave it as the same duration and the same curve, or just make it ease in or ease out. Now when we preview this is what it looks like. It starts as the little square, and then it loads across, and then it reveals downwards as well. Now for our third animation, we're going to set up our typography loading animation. So we're going to drag a copy of the last frame from our previous animation, which was our mask reveal, and we'll drag that one across to the typography working zone now. This is important when working in this way in Figma, is that you want all the layers to be the same. So you actually want it to be the same frame built upon each other, or you want to rename the layers so that they're all the same, so that you don't get that weird thing in Figma when it can't work out how to smart animate correctly. If we look at the storyboard of this one, we want the type to load in first, and then we want the button to load in next, and then finally we want the navigation to load in. So let's select those 3 different parts, the nav, the button, and the type, copy that, and then paste that into our working frame, and the positions will be the same. And reposition it if you need to. We're going to lock our background image as we don't need to touch that now. We're just going to rename things as I find it easier to animate when everything is easily named. Now we're going to make a copy of our heading typography. We're going to leave one on the frame so that we know the right way to position it when we're finished setting up the component. Now with this typography animation, it's best if you just do it 1 line at a time to make it work. Wraps over 2 lines like this, just follow along. So delete your second line so you only have 1 line. Now click F on your keyboard to draw a frame and make it matching so it's the width and the height of your typography. You can copy the properties if that's easier, and make sure that clip content is on your frame. Now grab your text and copy it and paste it within the frame. Get rid of any fill within the frame. Now with the text within your frame, select your frame and click Create Component, add a variant, and now your second state is going to be your loaded state, and your first one is going to be the preload. So select the text within it, and I like to add a little bit of an angle to it so it looks like the letters all coming up individually at their own speed. So let's start with about -1, as the E will be the first letter you see. And now with your text selected, drag it outside your frame. So drag it directly below your frame. If you click Command Y, you can see that it's still there and it's still attached to the frame, but it's just out of it now. And because we have clip component on, you can't see it. Now click Prototype, drag a noodle from your first to your second. We're going to set it to after delay and set your timing up. And now drag a copy of this component to set up the second line of text as well, as it's going to use a lot of the same properties, so it's a lot faster to just reuse the component. Copy your text from your second line and now replace it in the second component. The only difference is that we want to set an after delay on this one so that the first line loads first and then the second line loads after the first line. So roughly whatever your first line's duration is, you can add something like that to the after delay. You can set it so it starts as the first one's coming up or when the first one finishes. You can play around with the timing of what suits you. Now with both of them, set them up, drag a copy of both of them into your frame and position them over the top. And now when they're both set in the right place, change their variant to the preload one. So you can't see them anymore, but you know that they're there because you've set them up. Now select your frame and click present to preview it. Now that I've previewed it, I can notice that the angle isn't enough. You can't really see that angle in it. So go back to your component and we want to set it so it's a little bit more angled, so it's a bit more noticeable. So maybe at about -2 or 3%. Set them both the same. You can play around with the timing here as well. So I've just changed my timing a little bit to make it feel a bit better. Now click present again to look at it. And now I'm much happier with how that's entering on the angle and also the timing of it loading. Now that's set up, we're gonna finish this animation with the button and the navigation load. So select both of those on your first frame. And we want them to appear from 0 opacity and load all the way up, and also move up the screen slightly. So with the navigation selected, we're going to +20 to the Y property to move it down the screen. And we're going to do the same to the button, +20, so they're both consistent. And now select them and change their appearance from 100% to 0%. Now drag a copy of your frame. And on the second frame, select your button and -20 from the Y property to move it into its original position and set its appearance from 0 back to 100. And drag one more copy to finish off the animation and repeat the same steps with the navigation. -20 from the Y and change the appearance from 0 to 100. One more thing we need to do as well is select the text components that we set up before, as we don't want them to reload every single frame. We just want them to load on the first frame and then after that stay loaded. So you got to select the text components and change them to the loaded state on the second and the third frame. Now click prototype and drag a noodle from the first to the second and set it to after delay. And you want the first frame to change to the second frame after your text animation has gone all the way through. So if you have multiple lines, whatever the last line it is, you need to combine the after delay number with the duration number to figure out how long it needs to stay on the first frame before it changes to the second one. So if I have 800 milliseconds and 1200 milliseconds, it needs to stay on the first frame for at least 2000 milliseconds before it changes to the second one. So here I'm just going back and I'm looking through at the animations I've set up, and I change them slightly. I make them a little bit quicker. So the last animation here is after delay of 850 milliseconds and has a duration of 800 milliseconds. So I need the first frame to stay on screen, those numbers combined. So I need it to stay on screen for at least 1650 milliseconds. And a little bit of buffer as well might feel nice. About 1850 milliseconds here before it loads to the second one, and set the duration to 800. And now connect noodle from the second frame to the third frame. This one you don't have to worry as much about the timing, just what feels right to you. So I've set this for about 800 milliseconds and the duration is 800 milliseconds. Now select your frame and click present and test it out. And as this is a constant iteration to get the animation feeling right, after first look, it felt a little bit slow. So I changed the duration from 800 milliseconds to 600 milliseconds duration for both of them. Now select your first one again and click present. And there it is. Your first line loads in and your second line loads in, and then after that, your button loads in, and finally your navbar loads in. And the last animation that we have is the scroll animation. The storyboard for this is that it will start in the hero section, and then it will scroll down to the first section, and then one of the images will be featured and it will grow to be larger. Same as before, let's build our working area down the bottom so we can build this animation. Same process as before, take the last screen from the previous animation to be the first screen of this animation. And now to make this as seamless as possible, it's best to extend the page and make the design that you want to scroll to be all on the same frame. So just build it normally how you would build a website, and then we're just going to crop the frame up when we apply the animation. So I'm just going to copy the design I have up here to the frame below. And now you can see I have the two sections here, the hero section and then the first feature section down. Now I'm going to grab the frame and drag it up and make sure clip content is on. So the two sections are still there, you just can't see them all. Now drag a copy of our frame. And now we want to select all the elements on the second frame and drag them upwards. So just imagine that it's scrolling down right now and stop where you want it to stop scrolling. Now to make the enlarged featured image, let's make one more frame from the second one. And same as before, select all the elements and drag them upwards. And the image we want to feature, we're going to make this one larger. And this is where it gets a bit interesting and you can apply that little bit of parallax. So just then we moved everything up at the same rate. It'll look like all the elements are moving up at the same speed. But if you want to get a little bit of that parallax scroll instead, if you select one of the elements and drag up further than the other elements, that element's going to have to move faster in the same amount of time as all the other elements to get to its end position. I'm just playing around with the layout here of how I want to center it. Now if we preview that, watch the one on the right, how it moves faster and actually overtakes the other elements as it's moving. And the other side of that, if we drag this element on the left down closer, so it has to move a smaller amount of distance, it's going to move much slower. So if we preview that again, you can see how slow that one on the left moves. We're going to push this further by moving the text down as well. So this is moving a small distance, so it's moving slower. Where in comparison, it will make the element on the right look like it's moving even further and faster. Now, if we preview that, you can see how the elements are moving at different speeds now. Now, the last thing I want to do is bring it all together. So we've been working on 4 separate animations in kind of 4 streams of work. But now really I want it to be all connected so that I can start on the loading animation and go all the way through to the scroll animation. So in Figma, I'm just going to move these top frames that we had that were kind of the storyboard frames that I was working off. And I'm going to drag the working frames up into the top section just as an organization thing, so we can clearly see which one are the final frames. So now I'm going to align these all just because some habits die hard. And now I'm going to connect them all together. So connect the last one of the loading animation to the first one of the mask reveal animation. Set this as after delay, and I'll set up my delay so that once it's been on that final screen of the loaded animation for 400 milliseconds, it can then transition to the mask reveal. And then I'll connect the mask reveal to the typography animation. And finally, I'll connect the typography animation to the scroll animation. Now if we go all the way to the start and add a flow starting point here, this is helpful so when you click R, it goes back to the part that you've set the flow starting point as. And if we click on that first frame and present, it will go through all of our animations. So all the way from our load up, when it loads from 0 to 100, and see right there, that's a good example of I've made a mistake. This is what I was talking about of you need to make sure that the elements are either named the same or they're the same elements and they're built off each other. As there's a little bit of a change there that you can see that when it fades it changes, and that's happening because the image element that I'm using here for the mask reveal is not the same one that I'm using in the mask reveal frame. So I need to copy that one and make sure it's put into the first one. So now if we load that again, we'll load all the way from 0 to 100. Once it hits 100, it's going to go into the mask reveal animation. Once that one's finished, the typography animation is going to load in, the button will load in, the nav will load in, and then finally our scroll animation loads in as well. Thanks for watching. Make sure you check out another video here.